Hello everyone, welcome back to the channel. Tonight, we're venturing deep into the isolated forests and backroads of the Appalachian Mountains, where some of the most terrifying encounters aren't with animals, they're with people. These are true Appalachia feral people horror stories, tales that prove sometimes the scariest thing in the woods is human. Before we begin, tell me, where are you watching from, and what time is it for you? Now, let's step into the shadows of Appalachia. I live alone on the hillside just outside Boone, North Carolina, in a small cabin I built myself. The kind of place where snow piles so high it silences everything, and the only light comes from the fireplace and the occasional street lamp far below. 2 years ago, in late December, I was still raw from a breakup that had left me questioning whether I could trust anyone, or even myself, to be steady in the world. My work as an artisan, making carved wooden bowls and hand-turned spoons, had been my only solace, the routine of shaping raw oak into smooth curves giving me a semblance of control. But the nights were different. The nights were mine. And that solitude, once comforting, had begun to feel like a trap. I would sit by the fire with tea cooling in my favorite mug, hearing nothing but the wind, until one night, around 11, I froze. There it was, the sound of footsteps crunching over ice, deliberate, measured, each one perfectly in time with the beat of my own heart. I told myself it was the wind settling the old boards of my steps, the snow shifting in the cold, but the rhythm persisted. I crept to the window, heart hammering, and peered into the night. Nothing. Just dark, snow-dusted trees and the faint glimmer of my lantern on the porch. I strained my ears, listening for the next step, and it came again. 1, 2, 3, 4. Up the steep incline that led to my cabin, each crunch exactly timed with my pulse. I tried reasoning it away, imagining a neighbor returning from the town grocery or a lost hiker, but deep down, I knew this was different. This was intentional. Someone, or something, was walking up those steps just for me, and I had no idea why. At first, I convinced myself I was imagining it, the way grief warps your senses, makes you see shadows where there are none, hear echoes where there is silence. But the next morning, footprints appeared in the snow. Thin, adult-size prints that stopped at the bottom of my porch. They were unbroken, clear, pressed into the ice as though someone had been standing there, looking up at my cabin for hours, then vanished. My neighbor, an older man named George, came by that afternoon to check on my generator and laughed when I showed him the tracks. "Honey, that's deer or maybe a raccoon," he said. "You've been cooped up too long." I nodded, forcing a smile, but I knew the prints weren't right. The heel and toe were too sharply defined for an animal. The weight was human. The nights that followed were worse. I started recording the steps on my phone, leaving the device by the window. When I played it back, I could hear the crunch of ice, yes, but underneath it, just beneath perception, a whisper, almost too faint to catch. "Come down." I told my best friend, Mara, who had helped me paint the cabin in the summer, and she laughed, brushing it off. "You're letting fear get inside your head," she said. But she didn't hear it herself, and I felt that familiar isolation coil tighter around me, reminding me that even those I trust could not perceive what I was experiencing. I began to leave candles by the steps, hoping the light might deter whatever was out there, but the footsteps continued, unafraid. One night, as the snow fell thick and muffled everything but my own pulse, I went to confront it. I opened the door and stepped onto the porch, the cold biting through my wool socks, my fingers numb in the thin leather gloves I'd left on the railing. The steps were frozen solid, glistening under the weak glow of the moon. I called out, my voice shaking. "Who's there?" Only silence answered, yet the rhythm started again. 1, 2, 1, 2, climbing toward the cabin. My heart matched it perfectly. I gripped the railing and felt the shiver of ice beneath my fingers, felt a presence that seemed to watch me, patient, waiting. When I looked over my shoulder, nothing moved. No shadow, no figure, just snow settling on the pines. A few days later, I woke to find a small notebook at the foot of my bed, the pages open. I had never seen it before. Inside were scrawled notes in my handwriting, lines I didn't remember writing. She waits, she hears me, I cannot go outside. I tried burning it, tearing it, throwing it in the creek behind the cabin, but each time it returned, clean, the same sentences staring up at me as if nothing had been done to it. When I showed it to George, he frowned and shook his head. "You're not making sense, friend," he said. "Nothing here is real." His dismissal only tightened the knot of panic in my chest. I began sleeping lightly, knife under my pillow, ears straining for the rhythm I could no longer ignore. The encounters became more intimate. One night, I thought I heard the crunch right at the top of the stairs, as though someone had reached the porch and was shifting weight. I pressed my face against the window, holding my breath, and saw nothing. No shape, no shadow, but the cold pressed against the glass like hands. I felt the brush of ice on my cheek, left small red marks that lingered for hours, stubborn against warming. I started leaving the porch light on, candles on every step, and still, the sound moved, slow, deliberate, taunting. The next morning, a thin scratch appeared along my arm, raised and raw, the kind of mark you get from fingernails, though I slept alone, in the same bed I had built with my own hands. I began to measure time by the steps, counting them as I lay awake, heartbeat and snow crunch sinking until dawn. The next escalation came during a snowstorm so thick I could barely see my own hand. I was in the kitchen, boiling water for tea, when I heard the steps, closer than ever, rising through the storm. They paused, and the crunching continued inside the cabin, faintly on the floorboards, pacing the living room, circling the table. I froze, every muscle taut, knife in hand. I called out, trembling, "Leave!" No answer. The presence lingered, brushing past me in the cold air, leaving a faint smell of iron, copper, blood, or maybe my imagination. When I checked, nothing was there. The kitchen chairs were perfectly aligned, and the floor was clean, not a footprint to show for the sound I had just felt. A week later, I left my cabin for supplies in town, taking the winding, icy road down. When I returned, snow fresh on the steps, I noticed footprints, deeper than usual, leading from the bottom of the hill to the porch. I followed them inside, knife clutched, and found my front door unlocked. Nothing had been stolen, nothing moved, but the fridge hummed differently, the smell of wood shavings and candle smoke thick in the air. And there, on the counter, the small notebook again, open to a new page. You will not sleep, you will not be alone. My hands shook as I picked it up. Mara came the next day when I called, and I told her everything. She insisted I was imagining things, that living alone in the snow could make anyone paranoid. She left, shaking her head, and I was left with the book, the marks on my arms, and the echo of those footsteps that seemed to follow me wherever I went. By late December, I had stopped trying to rationalize it. I learned to move quietly through the cabin, never stepping outside after dark without a plan, knife under my pillow, candles lit on every step. The snow crunch became a second heartbeat, a measure of fear I could not shake. Some nights I would sit by the fire for hours, watching the windows for movement, waiting for a rhythm that always returned. Even now, 2 years later, I feel it, hear it in the hollow moments before sleep, that careful, deliberate climb, matching my own pulse, a reminder that solitude comes with a price. I still live on that hillside. I still make my wooden bowls, carve spoons, and count the heartbeat of snow against the steps. I keep a knife under my pillow every night, just beneath the thin sheet, and the bruises along my arm occasionally bloom red again when the winter is coldest. The notebook sits on the shelf, pages pristine but forever wrong, as if mocking the logic I once clung to. If you ever find yourself alone in a hillside cabin during a snowstorm and you hear footsteps on the frozen steps, pause. Do not rush to the window. Do not call out. Do not step outside. Wait, breathe, and keep something sharp within reach. Because even when you see nothing, you will feel it. You will know it is there, pacing, counting, always keeping time with your heartbeat. I survived, but I am not the same. And every December when the snow falls thick and the steps glisten, I remember that fear and I sleep lightly, knife under my pillow, heartbeat and footsteps perfectly synchronized, waiting for the rhythm that never stops. Before we jump into the next story, please like the video and subscribe to the channel. We really need your love and support. I used to take the same path home after work every day, trudging through the mountain hollow in Pocahontas County, West Virginia, my boots crunching over snow and ice, scent of wet pine clinging to my jacket. Logging assistant work kept me moving, hands raw from chainsaws and hauling, but it also left me hollow in ways I couldn't patch up with routine. I lived alone on the edge of town, small cabin with a wood stove, rarely seeing anyone besides co-workers and the occasional clerk at the gas station. My nights were usually quiet, the kind of quiet that pressed on your chest until you felt like the mountains themselves were breathing with you, or against you. That night, just past 9, a fresh snowstorm had passed, leaving a thick fog curling in the hollow like smoke. As I walked, I noticed footprints behind me, new and deep, though I hadn't heard anyone else enter the path. I slowed, curious and anxious, and the fog grew heavier, the smell of wet pine sharper, almost clinging to my hair. I turned quickly, expecting a hiker or a stray hunter, but there was nothing. The footprints stopped abruptly, vanishing as though the snow had swallowed them whole. At first, I tried to shrug it off. My mind was tired, overworked, craving sleep and warmth, imagining things in the fog where the forest thinned. I rationalized the smell of pine and the footprints as leftover marks from deer or elk, though the prints were unmistakably human-sized. I even muttered to myself, scolding my imagination, that I was getting soft from loneliness. Still, a twinge of unease followed me the rest of the way home, tight in my chest like a glove soaked with cold sweat. When I stepped inside, removed my snow boots, I noticed the faintest smudge on my forearm, dark and almost sticky, like pine sap. But there had been none near the trail. I rubbed at it, frustrated, and eventually gave up, leaving the mark to fade, telling myself I was too tired to care. The fog outside crept into my mind more than my vision, curling around memories of lost friends, of nights spent waiting for someone who had moved on or died, a gnawing reminder that I was, as always, alone in these mountains. The second night, the fog returned thicker, rolling down the slopes and clinging to the bare trunks like fingers. I was finishing up with my chainsaw when I noticed movement ahead, half shadows just beyond the thick white air. Figures, maybe 2 or 3, standing in the hollow. I froze, heart hammering, gloves tight on the saw's handle. They didn't move like animals. They lingered, swaying slightly, looking at nothing I could see. I called out, voice shaking, "Hello, is someone there?" No answer, only the faint whisper of snow and the increasing scent of pine. I stepped closer, and as I did, the figures simply vanished, leaving only fog and footprints that disappeared behind them. I looked back toward the cabin, considering calling a neighbor or the local ranger, but remembered how I had dismissed my own fears last night. I sighed, telling myself again that it had to be someone playing a prank, maybe kids from the next ridge. But the smell of pine lingered on my clothes, stronger than any trail I had passed, clinging to my sleeves like a warning I couldn't shake. The next day, I tried rationalizing further. I told my coworker, Dan, over lunch, about the fog and the figures. He laughed, shaking his head, calling me jumpy. "Man, you've been working too hard. You're seeing ghosts in the mist." I tried to smile, nodding, but inside I felt a gnawing tension. It wasn't just the fog or the cold. It was the way the hollow seemed to watch me back, the way the trees leaned in, shadows flicking where light should be. That night, I went out again, notebook in hand, hoping to write down the strange patterns, the footprints, anything to make sense of the fear that had nested in my chest. I noticed the footprints again, fresh, deeper than mine, and they seemed to curve around me in subtle arcs. I followed them with my eyes, but every time I thought I could see where they ended, they simply disappeared, vanishing into the fog like they had never existed. I made notes anyway, sketching the curves, the points where they faded, desperate for proof, desperate to anchor myself in reality, and yet every page seemed to blur before my eyes as if the fog had found its way onto the paper. The intimate encounters started subtly but grew sharper with every night I ventured out. I remember one evening, a week after the first sighting, trudging through the hollow, when I heard the faintest snapping of twigs behind me. I froze, muscles locked, and turned slowly. A figure stood barely visible through the fog, faint and gray, as though drawn from smoke and pine needles. I held my breath, stepping forward, hoping to see a face, but as I moved closer, the figure dissolved, leaving only the sharp scent of pine, so intense it made my eyes water. I rubbed my forearm where a faint sting had appeared, a shallow reddish line that had not been there before, and realized the fear was leaving marks, physical proof I couldn't dismiss. I stumbled home, boots heavy with snow, notebook abandoned on the table, words half formed in my mind, thoughts scattered by panic that refused to fade. Dan would later laugh if he saw me trembling like that, but I could not bring myself to tell anyone how real it felt, how close it had come, how it left pieces of itself on me, however fleeting. Another night I heard voices, soft murmurs drifting from the hollow as I walked toward the cabin, almost indistinguishable from the rustle of branches. I strained to hear, but the fog thickened around me, curling like fingers at my face and hands. Each step seemed to echo too loudly in the frozen silence. The smell of pine intensified, clinging to my hair and gloves, as if the figures were passing just out of reach. I dropped my flashlight, heart pounding, hands shaking, and when I bent to pick it up, I noticed that my notebook, which I had left on the table, was open to a page I didn't remember writing. Scribbled lines, jagged and frantic, described figures I had only just imagined seeing, footprints that curved impossibly in the snow, words I could not recall forming in my own hand. I tried showing it to Dan the next day, desperate for someone to acknowledge the strangeness, and he brushed it off with a chuckle, shaking his head. "Must have been the wind-flipping pages. You need to get some sleep, man." But the pencil marks did not disappear. They lingered, crooked and angry on the paper, proof I could not explain, proof that the hollow had left its mark on me in ways beyond logic. The final moments that cemented the terror happened late, after another storm had passed, and the fog rolled low into the valley. I was heading home, boots sinking into soft snow, and I noticed the footprints again. Directly behind me, fresh, human-sized, then stopping abruptly a few yards away. I stepped cautiously, heart hammering, and the smell of pine hit me so sharply it made me dizzy. I called out, voice tight with panic, "Who's there?" Nothing but the whisper of wind. Then a shape emerged, small and gray, hovering near a cluster of frost-covered evergreens. I froze, instinctively raising my hands, and as I did, the figure stepped closer, then dissipated like smoke, leaving the pungent pine scent and the sharp red mark across my forearm, deepening slightly, lingering with a heat that contrasted with the cold around me. I stumbled home, not stopping to look back, trembling, hands raw and numb from gripping my coat. That night, I could not sleep. The fog and the scent of pine invading my dreams, figures curling around me in darkness, echoing the emptiness I had tried to fill with work and isolation. Now, months later, I avoid the hollow at night entirely. I take the longer route home, lights on in my cabin until dawn, doors locked and windows closed tight. The notebook still sits on my table, scribbles jagged and impossible. A record of fear I cannot deny or fully explain. The mark on my forearm, though faded, is still faintly visible. A reminder that what I experienced was real, physical, and inescapable. I walk past the hollow during the day sometimes, but even then, I can feel the pull of fog and pine, the sensation of being watched by forms that do not belong to the world I know. If you ever find yourself walking alone through a mountain hollow after a winter storm, and notice footprints behind you that vanish in the fog, or catch the sharp smell of pine growing stronger without reason, do not follow it. Do not step into the fog. Keep your distance. Sometimes the hollow waits patiently for someone to approach, lingering in shapes and scents, leaving marks that cannot be erased, a quiet reminder that solitude can attract things we do not fully understand. I've been a forest ranger in Harlan County, Kentucky for nearly a decade, used to long stretches of silence broken only by the rustle of pine needles or the distant cry of a hawk. 4 years ago, in midwinter, I was patrolling a back road through a hollow I knew too well. A place where snowdrifts pile high against the trees, and the old church at the bottom had long been abandoned. My life had been simple, orderly. Coffee at 6, check the radios, walk the perimeter, note any signs of trespassers. But after a dispute with the county over budget cuts and complaints that I was lax in reporting minor incidents, I carried a gnawing anxiety, a fear of losing credibility in a job I had dedicated my life to. That night, around 9, the quiet of the hollow fractured. Bells rang, clear and resonant, like they had been struck by unseen hands. I froze, gripping the steering wheel, telling myself it was a truck hitting an unseen culvert, or perhaps someone up ahead fiddling with an old fence. But the hollow was empty, the wind dead. The sound was deliberate, coming from the church, whose doors had been locked for decades. At first I tried rationalizing it. Maybe a local kid had broken in, maybe a hunter with a sense of mischief. The bells tolled intermittently, echoing between the hollow's hills, always closer than they should be, almost moving toward me in their resonance. I parked my truck at the side of the road, boots crunching over the icy gravel, and walked toward the church. Snow weighed heavy on the branches, dripping in crystalline shards, and the metallic tang of cold pressed against my tongue with each breath. I reached the doors, tried the lock. It hadn't budged. The bells stopped abruptly, then started again, each tone vibrating through the soles of my boots, as though they were marking time for me. I recorded the sound on my phone, telling myself proof would make me credible, that I could finally show the skeptics what I'd heard. But when I played it back later, The recording was warped, every toll echoing too long, overlapping itself, the chime seeming to come from inside my own skull. I returned home that night unsettled, a sensation crawling over my skin, prickling like frostbite. The next day, I told my supervisor about it over the radio. He chuckled, his tone light but dismissive. "Bells from the hollow? Ben, you've been out there too long. Maybe the old stories are getting to you." I tried laughing it off, but the unease only deepened. Later, a friend who worked in the county archives showed me a photograph of the church from the 1950s. In it, a congregation gathered in front, and there, leaning against the steps, was a child with a small bell in his hand, eyes wide, smiling. I swore I saw movement in the image, like a flicker, but my friend scoffed and put it away, insisting I had imagined it. That photograph, though, stayed in my mind. I kept thinking about the hollow's stories, about the child who froze to death one winter, bell in hand, waiting for the congregation that never came. The first real moment of terror came when I patrolled the hollow again a few nights later. I stepped out of the truck, flashlight sweeping over the snow, and the bells tolled immediately, closer, clearer. The sound bounced off the trees in impossible ways, coming from behind, above, all around me. I swung the light toward the church doors, locked, but when I looked to the side, I could have sworn I saw a figure on the steps, small, swaddled in a dark coat, head bowed. My pulse spiked, fingers numb, and when I raised the beam fully, there was nothing. Snow, only snow, but a small footprint remained pressed into the fresh layer, tiny, frozen in the form of a child's shoe. I knelt to inspect it. The print disappeared moments later under a flurry of fresh flakes, leaving only the icy ground beneath. My skepticism wavered. After that, I began noticing subtle intrusions. On my desk at the ranger station, a notebook I used to log patrols was found open, pages scribbled in a hand that looked eerily like mine, but with letters that curved too sharply, almost playful. Sometimes, when I returned to my truck in the morning, the keys I had set on the dashboard were turned slightly, as if someone had handled them. Once, I took a co-worker along, telling him about the bells. He drove silently with me, boots and eyes fixed on the snowy road. When I pointed to the church as the bells rang, he frowned. "There's nothing here, Ben. Just empty. You've got to stop letting these stories spook you." But he had not noticed the frost-lined footprints I had seen leading up the steps, or the metallic taste of cold that lingered in my mouth when the sound vibrated through my skull. I began sleeping poorly. The bells became a rhythm I could not ignore, each toll marking minutes of relentless insomnia. I woke to find small bruises forming along my forearm, like fingertip impressions pressed into flesh, fading slowly, inexplicably. I could feel them in the cold light of morning, reminders that something I could not see, something I could not name, had been with me, tangible and real. The next time I drove the hollow, the tolling bells began before I even reached the bend in the road, closer with each passing night. I tried ignoring them, tried thinking it was my mind playing tricks, but the sound intruded even when I parked my truck and stepped inside a friend's cabin for shelter. It followed. It pressed against my chest with every note. One night, determined to confront whatever it was, I walked up to the church, flashlight cutting through the falling snow, heart hammering like the bell toll itself. The doors remained locked, untouched, but the sound of the bells came from inside, vibrating the very air, echoing against the wood and frozen stone. I stepped closer, and in the snow beside the steps, I saw the imprint of the child again, bell in hand, as if frozen mid-step. I bent closer, and when I exhaled, my breath caught in the icy air. The print shifted slightly, moving toward the door. I stumbled back, lungs burning, and the bells ceased for a moment, leaving only the hollow's emptiness. Then began again, softer now, mournful, insistent. I ran to my truck, hands shaking, feeling for the warmth of the steering wheel, the thrum of my pulse echoing in time with the spectral chimes. The most harrowing night came when the storm was heaviest. Visibility was almost zero, the hollow a blur of snow and shadow. I parked and stepped out to check markers along the road, the bells sounding immediately, clearer than ever, as if they had been waiting for me. I felt the air press down on me, thick and cold, carrying the faint smell of iron and old wood. There, among the pines, I thought I saw movement, a flash of a coat, a small figure darting behind a tree. I chased it, slipping over the ice, crashing into branches, and the figure vanished, leaving only the echoing tolls. I returned to my truck, soaked, numb, the metallic taste of fear on my tongue. And for the first time, I understood that ignoring the warnings of the hollow did not make them go away. After that, I stopped patrolling that hollow in winter. I could not risk my credibility, yet I could not risk my mind either. The bells continue to ring in my memory, each toll an imprint I cannot erase. The notebook remains on my shelf at home, pages warped and smudged in ways I cannot explain, a record of events that refuse rational interpretation. The bruises on my arm occasionally reappear in the coldest months, faint but undeniable. And if I listen closely, I can still hear the echo of the bells, the lonely chime of a tragedy long past, warning anyone who might come too close to a hollow that does not forgive curiosity or skepticism. If you ever find yourself driving a back road in winter through Harlan County, and you hear bells ringing where no wind blows, take my word, turn around. Do not approach the abandoned church. Do not linger. Do not try to rationalize. The sound is closer than it seems, and the hollow has a memory that can reach into the living. I learned that the hard way, and I no longer patrol that hollow, winter or otherwise, leaving the bells and their echoing tragedy to the snow and the dark. I've lived alone for most of my life, on the ridge outside Wise County, Virginia, raising cattle and tending to the small fields my father left me. The farm stretches across a snow-swept hollow, and in winter, it feels like the mountains close in around you, pressing quiet and isolation against your chest. 2 years ago, in January, I was still reeling from my father's death, a man I never properly told I loved him, and every task, feeding the animals, stacking firewood, clearing snow, felt like a small penance I imposed on myself. That night, I was walking the edge of the pasture, lantern swinging in my gloved hand, when I noticed a faint glow coming from the window of the old barn across the snowfield. My chest tightened. That barn collapsed years ago, roof caved in, walls sagging, roofless and forgotten. But there, in the upper pane, a soft, wavering light. At first I thought maybe a neighbor had strayed with a flashlight, or that the ice was catching the moon in a trick of reflection, but the glow flickered like candlelight, warm and intimate against the pale snow. I stopped mid-step, listening. A soft tapping sounded against what remained of the barn wall, gentle, rhythmic, like someone trying to get attention. I told myself it was a raccoon, maybe a fox, climbing over the timbers. But the sound had purpose, a cadence I could not reconcile with an animal. I walked closer, the snow deep and crusting under my boots, every step a groan of ice and frost. The window reflected the moon perfectly, or so it seemed, until I noticed faces. Not mine, not anyone I knew, but fleeting images, like memories trapped behind broken glass, children laughing, men shouting across the yard, a horse pawing at the fence. I blinked, and they vanished. I shook my head and laughed at myself. Grief makes you see what isn't there, doesn't it? But when I reached the barn's edge, I saw scratches along the wood, fresh, like someone, or something, had tried to grip it. I ran home and didn't sleep that night. The next evening, I returned, lantern swinging, hoping for nothing but confirmation that the barn was empty. I didn't find emptiness. The light flickered again, a soft orange hue, and this time I heard whispers, so faint I couldn't make out words, but I was certain one of them called my name. I froze, the cold air stealing my breath, and I could smell smoke faintly, as if someone had burned wood in the hollow hours before. The images in the broken window pane returned, sharper now. My father stacking hay, me as a boy dragging water buckets, animals feeding under his watch. A tightness pressed against my ribs, grief twisting into guilt. I had left things unfinished, fences unrepaired, winter feed delayed, and I felt the barn's history pressing on me as though it knew. I tried to show my sister, driving her through the hollow after supper. She leaned out the car window and squinted. "It's just snow catching the lantern light," she said, brushing snow from her coat. "You've been cooped up too long," I insisted, but she refused to see what I saw. Alone again, I returned night after night, recording notes in a small notebook, sketching the outlines of the window and the glow. The pages blurred each time I looked, ink smearing like the past itself was leaking into the present. Once, I reached to touch the broken pane, ice biting through my glove, and a cold burn ran across my knuckles, leaving a faint purple bruise that remained for weeks. A mark I could not explain, a proof that my eyes weren't entirely deceiving me. One night, I crept closer, silent, boots barely making sound over the frozen field. The tapping grew louder, insistent. I leaned against the timbers, lantern low, and the window seemed to pulse. The faces appeared again. My father, younger, moving with ease through the barn, my own hands as a boy fumbling with tools. A whisper, so close I could feel it against my ear, said my name. I stumbled back, heart hammering, snow crunching underfoot, and the light vanished. My notebook that night showed a full barn, intact and warm, but I knew it was impossible. The ink was smeared again, a surreal snapshot that betrayed the reality I knew to be true. Weeks later, after a day of repairs, I returned to the field. Lantern in hand, the snow crunching underfoot, and I saw the tapping again. This time I called out, "I'm listening. What do you want?" The wind howled, and the light flared bright for a moment. I thought I saw my father's shadow in the pane, raising a hand, pointing at the north fence line I had neglected. I followed it instinctively, finding a broken post buried under snow, the repair long overdue. I realized then the haunting wasn't malicious. It was warning, guiding, tethered to unfinished business, to a guilt I had buried under years of routine. My heart raced, chest tight, metallic taste sharp in my mouth, but I felt a small relief for doing what I should have long ago. Even after that night, the visits continued. The light appeared on the coldest nights, and the tapping returned, soft and insistent, almost like a heartbeat against the wood. I kept the notebook, now more of a record than evidence, and the bruise on my knuckles had faded into a faint shadow, a reminder that the experiences were real. Once, my neighbor caught me standing at the edge of the field, eyes fixed on the barn. He asked what I was doing. I told him nothing, though I wanted to explain. He shook his head, smiling, saying I had been out in the snow too long and should come inside. He didn't see the light, the tapping, the window that reflected moments lost to time. Alone again, I felt the weight of isolation, my senses tuned to the faint glow, the tapping, the subtle whispering in the wind. The most vivid encounter came on a night of fresh snow. Lantern low, I approached the barn, hoping only to confirm the images, to find some closure. The light shone brighter than ever, and I swear the pain showed me the barn whole, roof intact, walls strong. My father was there, older than in my memories, but his eyes met mine, steady, and I felt a tug at my heart, a pull of regret and love unspoken. I reached forward, hand shaking, and the light flared, casting shadows across the snow. When it faded, the barn was ruins again, the window broken, cold and silent. I shivered in the snow, feeling a metallic taste, heart racing, but no fear, only the lingering ache of what I had left undone. I still drive past the hollow, especially in winter. Even if the snow is gone, even if the barn is little more than rubble, I cannot help but glance at the old window, wondering if the light will flicker, if the tapping will return. I repaired the fences my father cared for, tended to the animals as he would have wanted, and yet the memories persist in the window pane, broken and warped, showing moments of past and present colliding in ways that defy reason. I've learned to respect what lingers in abandoned places. And if you ever see a light in a structure long gone, listen for the tapping and don't ignore it. Some things are reminders, some warnings, and some are impossible to leave alone. I've been driving delivery routes in the mountains around Oak Ridge, Tennessee, for nearly a decade. A life defined by long stretches of dark, empty roads and the hum of diesel engines. 1 year ago, in January, a blizzard swept through, turning the narrow mountain roads into ice slicks and snow-packed ribbons that seemed to vanish into the blackness. I was tired, isolated from friends and family after a breakup that left me unmoored, and every night my truck became a small, moving island of warmth in the frozen void. On one particular night, somewhere past 10, I rounded the bend before the old turnaround, and there it was, headlights off, parked exactly where no vehicle should have been. A nondescript, rusty truck, ordinary except for the way it seemed to belong to the road, yet not at all. My hands tightened on the wheel. At first I thought a hiker or a lost trucker, someone stranded. But the snow was thick, visibility almost nil, and I knew I would have seen tracks in the fresh powder. I stopped the truck a few yards back, fog curling from my breath, and watched. The headlights flicked on briefly, as though acknowledging me, then went out. The faint smell of diesel hung in the freezing air, clinging to the interior of my truck whenever I cracked the window to look closer. My heart pounded in uneven bursts, echoing off the bare trees lining the road. I stepped out, boots crunching over the ice, telling myself I would at least make sure no one was in danger. There was no one. Nothing moved. And yet, when I circled the truck, I could feel the vibration in the ground, a faint hum that wasn't mine, a presence that seemed to hold its breath along with me. I took a photo on my phone, rationalizing that proof would calm me. But when I looked at the screen, the truck was blurry, lights smearing across the frame as though it had been captured mid-shift, half here, half somewhere else. I laughed nervously, shaking my head. Maybe I was exhausted. Maybe the breakup and the long nights were warping my perception. The next night, I saw it again, at almost the exact same spot. This time, I stayed in the truck, watching. The headlights blinked on as I approached, a soft flash that caught the swirling snow. I wanted to call dispatch, but something in my chest froze me. I could not explain why, though the road was familiar and I had driven it countless times. I felt a tightening of the air around me, a sense that moving closer would trigger something irreversible. I tried talking to a coworker the next day, telling him about it. He chuckled. "You're imagining things. Winter roads play tricks on your eyes, trust me." He hadn't driven that stretch, hadn't smelled diesel in freezing snow, hadn't felt the subtle vibration that wasn't the truck's engine. I drove past the turnaround in daylight and found nothing. Smooth ice, undisturbed snow, and no tracks of any kind. That disparity gnawed at me. Over the next few weeks, it became a nightly pattern. No matter how late, no matter the storm, the truck appeared in the same place. Sometimes the headlights blinked at me. Sometimes they stayed dark. The smell of diesel clung to the air like smoke from a fire I could not see. I started taking notes in a small notebook I carried in the glove compartment, sketching the truck's outline and jotting down the times I saw it. Pages blurred with smudges, ink running in ways I could not explain, as if the freezing temperatures or the night itself had altered what I recorded. My hand bore small scratches, faint but persistent, always along my forearm as though something had brushed past me when I circled the truck. I never saw anyone, never heard a voice, but the presence was unmistakable. Familiar, yet alien, like a memory I couldn't recall clearly. One night, desperate to confront it, I parked several hundred feet back, phone flashlight out, waiting. The wind howled, snow driving across the cab, and I felt the pulse of something out there, just beyond sight. The headlights flicked on, the faint smell of diesel thick in my nose, and I stepped forward. The crunch of snow under my boots seemed to synchronize with my heartbeat, a rapid, hollow drum that made the world feel smaller, tighter. I reached the truck and circled it again. Empty. The interior light never moved, the doors locked, the heater cold. I leaned on the hood, exhaling, and when I straightened, the truck was no longer exactly where I had left it. Slightly forward, tires angled differently. I stumbled back, heart racing, and when I glanced at my notebook later, a sketch I had drawn of the front bumper now showed the truck facing the opposite direction, headlights off, as though it had shifted while I wasn't looking. Another night, a storm heavier than the last, I saw the truck from farther down the road. My stomach churned. As I approached, the headlights blinked on once, and in that instant, I felt a presence beside me in the cab, though I was alone. A metallic tang, like diesel mixed with iron, filled my mouth. I swore I felt a hand brush mine on the wheel, fleeting, colder than the air outside. I jumped, slamming the truck into gear, and the truck in the turnaround vanished from sight as quickly as I had glimpsed it. The memory stayed with me, the ghostly brush on my hand, leaving a faint, purplish bruise along my forearm that persisted for weeks. A tangible proof of a night my eyes told me was impossible. The more I tried to rationalize, the less my mind cooperated. I drove in daylight, empty turnaround. I spoke to friends, dismissal, laughter. But at night the truck's presence was undeniable. It became a ritual I could not break. The blizzard, the icy road, the faint diesel smell, the blink of headlights, the sense of being watched or followed. Once, a family member drove the route with me. I pointed to the turnaround. Nothing. "You're seeing things," he said flatly, brushing snow from his coat, refusing to acknowledge the diesel scent, refusing to see the shifting truck, refusing to see the bruise that still lingered along my forearm. My isolation deepened, compounded by the knowledge that evidence, while present, was corrupted or ambiguous, impossible to prove to anyone else. By the third week, my routine changed entirely. I refused to approach the turnaround, no matter the delivery. I parked farther down, walked with my flash on, avoided the section entirely. Each night, headlights flickered in my memory, the smell of diesel clinging to the windshield, a sense of being followed by something that wasn't alive, and yet not absent. The bruise on my arm remained as a reminder. my notebook's smudged pages a record of a presence that defied explanation. I stopped trying to convince anyone. The reality of the truck existed only in my perception, yet my body remembered. My pulse quickened whenever I thought of the road, my hands automatically gripping the steering wheel, scanning shadows for headlights that might never appear. I avoid that stretch of road now. I reroute deliveries, sometimes adding hours to my drive, just to ensure I never see the turnaround at night. The memory of the truck, the blink of headlights, the smell of diesel in freezing air, the hand brushing mine that left a mark, remains vivid, an imprint I cannot erase. If you ever drive a narrow mountain road in winter and sense a vehicle parked in the dark, take it seriously. Don't approach. Do not linger. Do not get curious. Some things are closer than they seem, and the unknown has a memory that can reach for you even in the most empty, frozen night. I've always been drawn to places abandoned and forgotten, drawn to the quiet decay of towns, factories, and mines where time seemed to stop, leaving only echoes of the past. I was 33 last winter, living alone in a small cabin outside Welch, West Virginia, photographing the remnants of McDowell County for my freelance work, and it was during a heavy snowstorm that I decided to explore the old Black Diamond coal mine. I had a habit of pushing myself into isolation, chasing the perfect shot while ignoring the simple comforts of human company. My father's death 5 years earlier had left a quiet guilt in me. He had warned me about chasing these obsessions, about disappearing into the mountains without telling anyone. That guilt, gnawing and constant, came with me into the mine, a weight in my chest as heavy as the snow on the hills above. The mine entrance was almost hidden under drifts, a dark maw that swallowed the pale winter light. I crouched under the lip, brushing snow off my jacket, and felt a shiver that wasn't entirely from the cold. Inside, the air was damp and heavy, smelling of iron and old coal dust, the kind of scent that clings to your clothes and never quite leaves. My flashlight cut a narrow path through the darkness, illuminating wooden supports bowed with age and walls streaked black with soot. I dropped a few pebbles onto the floor to test the acoustics, and the tiny echoes were sharp, bouncing back in uneven, whispered repetitions. As I stepped further in, I noticed footprints in the dust. Fresh footprints. I froze. The place had been closed for decades. No one should have been here. I leaned closer, heart hammering, convinced someone had entered before me, but the prints stopped abruptly, ending in a perfect empty space that gave no hint of direction. The first drop of panic hit me then, metallic and bitter in my mouth. I tried to tell myself it was animal tracks, or perhaps the wind had shifted debris in a pattern that resembled footprints, but the rationalizations felt hollow. I set up my camera, taking long exposures, and the echo of water dripping somewhere deep in the mine sounded like hushed whispers, soft syllables I could almost understand. My lens picked up nothing, but my ears were certain I had heard my name, spoken clearly, deliberately, though no one was there. I called out, voice trembling, but the mine swallowed my words. When I checked my phone for signal, there was none, just static interference, and a faint bruise was forming on my forearm, small and circular, as if pressed there without my knowledge. I laughed weakly at myself, trying to shake off the tension, and pressed on, deeper into the mine. The farther I walked, the colder the air became, though snow had no way of reaching me here. The dripping grew louder, echoing in the tunnels, sometimes sounding like footsteps, sometimes like words I could almost grasp. I found a collapsed section of the mine where timbers had rotted and fallen into the passage. My flashlight illuminated strange scratch marks on the floor and walls, shapes that seemed deliberate, almost symbolic, curling and jagged. I knelt to photograph them, the camera shaking in my hands. When I looked at the images later on my small screen, the scratches appeared elongated, twisted into shapes that weren't there in reality, like someone, or something, had edited the scene after I captured it. My hand brushed against the wall, and I felt a wet chill, like something had exhaled directly onto my skin. I recoiled, heart racing, and the bruise on my arm had darkened further. Voices came then, faint but unmistakable, echoing my name in soft, urgent whispers. I spun around, trying to catch movement, but the shadows remained empty. I told myself it was exhaustion, cabin fever, a consequence of working alone for too many nights, yet my stomach twisted in dread. I noticed footprints appearing behind me again, precise and deliberate, following every step I took, never crossing my path, never ending. I whispered into the darkness, asking who was there, pleading silently with the empty air, and the dripping sound quickened, now a staccato rhythm like someone moving just beyond the reach of my light. Hours seemed to pass in minutes as I explored the winding corridors, flashlight bouncing across timber and stone. I stumbled into a room filled with old mining tools, rusted pickaxes and helmets, and a small notebook lying on the ground. It had been closed, untouched, yet inside were entries that seemed to mimic my own thoughts, written in an unfamiliar but eerily similar hand. Notes on footprints, the sound of dripping water, questions about whispers calling a name. I shivered violently, the cold biting my fingers through my gloves, and pressed the notebook closed. When I glanced up, I noticed the footprints again, closer now, circling me, though I had heard no one move. A sudden gust of wind, or the mine's own settling, sent a shower of dust falling from the ceiling, and for a heartbeat I thought I saw a figure in the distance, blurred, almost translucent, moving just beyond the beam of my flashlight. I froze, throat dry, feeling the bruising on my forearm pulse painfully. I whispered, "Who's there?" And the echo of my own voice returned as a chorus of my name, layered, multiplied, and warped. Panic surged, metallic and bitter, and I ran blindly down the corridor, camera swinging at my side, until I stumbled into a low tunnel I hadn't noticed before. The dripping now sounded like soft, hissing breaths, and I felt the air press close, heavy with anticipation. I finally found my way back toward the mine's entrance as the storm outside raged harder, the snow muffling the world beyond. I stumbled into the daylight, lungs burning, hands numb, and the mine behind me seemed silent once more. I collapsed into the snow, shaking violently, watching the darkness of the entrance stretch behind me like a black wound. In the mountain, my phone displayed photographs that made no sense, shadows where none existed, lines of footprints appearing and disappearing between frames, scratches etched into surfaces that weren't there when I had examined them. Thomas, my friend, when I showed him the images later, laughed and said I must have been overworked, imagining things, but the bruise on my forearm was undeniable, and I knew what I had experienced was real, in a way that no rational explanation could fully dismiss. Since that night, I haven't entered a mine during snowfall. The sound of dripping water echoes in my dreams, faint whispers carrying my name, and I wake with the metallic taste in my mouth and the bruise lingering on my arm, subtle yet permanent. I still return to photograph abandoned places, but the mines, especially when winter storms cover the hills, are off limits. If you hear your name called in the echo of a mine, or see footprints where none should be, leave immediately and never look back. I used to work 12-hour night shifts at the Asheville hospital, and by January 5 years ago, I was running on barely any sleep. The roads outside the city were treacherous that winter, slick with ice and powder from the storm that seemed to settle over the mountains like a heavy quilt. I remember leaving the hospital just past 11 o'clock, tired to the bone, heater blasting, windshield wipers swiping endlessly at the snow that refused to stop. The highway thinned into a narrow mountain road, flanked by dark forest and sheer drop-offs. That's when I noticed it. A car parked behind me in the dim glow of the rearview mirror, headlights flickering like a shy animal, never approaching, never overtaking. I told myself it was another delivery driver lost in the storm, someone taking a break, but the way it mimicked every curve, every slight break, set my nerves on edge. The radio cut in and out, a low static whisper every time I glanced back, and I had a metallic taste at the back of my throat, a tightness I couldn't shake. By the next night, I couldn't ignore it. The car was there again, same dark shape, headlights blinking in hesitation. I slowed, tried pulling off at a small turnout, but it mirrored me. The exhaust smell, diesel, faint but unmistakable, drifted into my cabin, and I realized I could smell it every time I looked in the mirror. I called my roommate, Jen, while parked behind the hospital's loading dock, trying to sound calm. "You're imagining it," she said, laughing, and I wanted to throw the phone against the wall because she wasn't seeing what I saw. I drove home that night, gripping the wheel so tightly my knuckles burned, and a bruise formed on my right hand, subtle but lingering, proof that my fear had left its mark. A few days later, I recorded my route on the dash cam, hoping to catch some mundane explanation. When I watched the footage the next morning, the parked car was there, yet the driver's seat was empty. Every time I looked closer, the dash cam would flicker, static stretching the frames into brief moments of something unrecognizable, a blurred shape leaning forward, a hand appearing on the steering wheel, gone the next second. I showed the footage to my manager, trying to keep my voice steady. "Probably a glitch," he said, dismissing it without a second glance. No one believed me, and I couldn't blame them. How could they? The road is lonely, the snow heavy, and the mind breaks under exhaustion. But I knew what I saw. I felt it in the scent, in the cold air pressing through the cracked window, in the way my stomach tightened whenever I passed that stretch. The first real panic came when I tried to stop for gas in a deserted lot halfway down the mountain. I left my headlights on, heart hammering, and when I looked back, the car was there again, bumper to bumper with mine, engine off, no one inside. I ran inside to pay, came back out seconds later, and it had moved up a few feet, perfectly matching my car. The static in the radio rose to a low hiss every time I glanced back, and I could feel my breath against the collar of my coat, icy and sharp. I floored it, tires spinning, snow spraying, but the car stayed close, ghost-like in its persistence. I called Jen again while driving, voice trembling. "Pull over somewhere safe," she said, trying to sound confident. I told her there was nowhere to pull over in this blizzard, not in the mountains, not with the cliffs on one side and the forest on the other. She tried to laugh it off, but I could hear the strain in her voice. Another night, I tried a different tactic. I stopped completely, hazard lights flashing, heart racing, and waited. The car stopped too, a few yards behind, perfectly still. My hands shook as I gripped the wheel, eyes darting to the mirror. The radio hissed static so loud it nearly drowned out the wind, and for a second I thought I saw a figure step out, pale and indistinct, hovering behind the wheel. When I blinked, it was gone. My pulse rattled in my ears, and I realized I hadn't noticed the chill that had seeped through the car's heater vents, the ice forming on the edges of the windshield. I didn't sleep that night, replaying the images in my mind, convinced I'd glimpsed someone, or something. Weeks of this passed, every night driving the same road, every night the car trailing, every night my nerves fraying. Sometimes I would try to lose it, turning onto smaller side roads, accelerating through the hairpin bends, but every time, headlights would reappear behind me, waiting at turns, flickering in perfect rhythm with the sway of my vehicle. I tried reasoning it away. Phantom fatigue, exhaustion playing tricks, a reflection in the snow. But the smell of diesel, so strong at times, reminded me it wasn't all in my head. Once, the bruise on my hand darkened again, even though I hadn't touched anything, and the metallic taste lingered for days after a night of pursuit. My last encounter happened just past 2 a.m., one of the coldest nights of January. I was almost home, exhausted, mind numb from lack of sleep, when the car reappeared behind me, closer than ever. I pressed the accelerator, weaving through the narrow road, tires crunching over frozen slush, and it matched me perfectly, never breaking distance. The static in the radio hissed louder, a high-pitched whining that made my ears ring. I glanced into the mirror one last time and swore I saw a hand on the steering wheel, pale and impossibly long, stretching as though reaching for me. I screamed, slammed the wheel into the ditch briefly to jolt myself awake, and when I looked again, the road behind me was empty, headlights gone, nothing but snow and silence. My hands shook violently, and I noticed a faint scrape on my left wrist, small but vivid, proof that the terror was real and not just imagined. I haven't driven that road at night since, even when I must deliver supplies or drive. Home late, I choose the highway, the longer, less isolated route. The snowed-in stretch that hugs the mountainside is off-limits, a place where I know something watches, something that may or may not be human, waiting patiently behind the empty driver's seat, replicating every move I make. I still wake some nights, hearing faint static in my dreams, headlights flickering just beyond the window, and I can feel that metallic taste in the back of my throat. If you ever see lights following you on an empty, snowed-in road, trust your instincts and get off it immediately. Don't linger. I had always been drawn to the mountains, to the stories the old folks told over wood smoke and whiskey, the kind of tales that seemed too real to dismiss when you're alone in the forest at night. I was 26, a college student, living in a small cabin near Lewisburg, West Virginia, researching Appalachian folklore for my thesis. And that January 3 years ago, the snow had fallen heavier than usual, blanketing the cemetery near the old crossroads like a frozen sea. I remember trudging across it, notebook in hand, boots crunching through pristine powder, when I noticed something that made me stop dead. A single grave, long abandoned, was covered in frost so fresh it glimmered under the pale moonlight, as though it had been freshly lain, though no one had been buried there in decades. A strange pattern had formed across it, delicate fingers etched into the frost, curling and stretching as though reaching for me. I thought I saw movement at first, but it was just the wind, or so I told myself. My hands shook from cold and nerves both, and I couldn't shake the feeling that I had stumbled into something I wasn't meant to find. I had always carried a quiet regret, a lingering guilt for leaving home during my father's last winter, ignoring the small emergencies that never reached me until it was too late. That weight pressed on me now, every step in the snow dragging me deeper into my unease. I knelt to photograph the frost with my phone, the screen's glow illuminating the delicate patterns. When I glanced up, I thought I saw footprints approaching in the snow, faint and deliberate. My pulse spiked. The cemetery should have been empty. No wind, no animals, no one had been out here in hours. The crunching came again, closer now, echoing in the still night, and I felt a metallic taste in my mouth, the cold biting into my lungs. I froze, telling myself it must be another hiker or a local fool wandering in the storm. But part of me, the part that remembered my father's last look, knew it was something else. I stepped back from the grave, heart hammering, and noticed the frost shifting subtly, the finger-like patterns stretching further, reaching toward the sky as if alive. I tried to laugh it off, blaming the way snow melts unevenly, but the sound of crunching footsteps persisted, now circling the grave. I spun, trying to catch the source, but saw nothing. I felt the hair on my arms prickle, and a faint smell of damp earth and decay hit me. Subtle, yet unmistakable. I snapped a few hurried photos, hands trembling so badly my fingers went numb, and made the long trek back to my cabin, glancing over my shoulder repeatedly, half expecting to see a figure frozen in the snow, watching me leave. The next day, I reviewed my photos under the warmth of a small oil lamp, hoping light and distance would return reason. But the images were wrong. The grave appeared untouched in one frame, the frost smooth and flawless, yet in the next, the finger, patterns stretched unnaturally long, curling over the edges of the stone. I showed them to my friend Thomas, a fellow student, who frowned and said, "Maybe you're just overworking yourself. Snow melts weirdly, shadows can play tricks." His words were meant to calm, but they cut deeper, highlighting my isolation, the fact that no one truly saw what I had witnessed. I tried to rationalize, told myself it was exhaustion, cold, stress. Yet the unease in my chest refused to dissipate, and I noticed a faint bruise forming on my wrist, small and round, the same color as dried blood, though I had bumped nothing. A week later, I returned to the cemetery, determined to study the frost and perhaps capture it more clearly. The snow had shifted, the grave nearly hidden beneath drifts, but as I approached, I heard it. The faintest whisper carried on the wind, words I could almost understand. My skin prickled, and the temperature around me seemed to drop further, the air heavy and moist. I tried calling out, my voice breaking against the snow, but only silence answered. The frost patterns had returned, curling over the grave again, and I could swear that for a brief moment they resembled hands, reaching, beckoning. I stumbled back, tripping over hidden roots, my camera shaking in my grasp. The whispering rose in pitch, subtle but insistent, until I fled the cemetery, heart pounding so hard I feared it would burst from my chest. That night, I dreamt of the grave, walking across snow that never ended, crunching underfoot as the whispers grew louder, shaping themselves into pleading words I could almost grasp. I woke hours later, drenched in sweat, the metallic taste returning to my mouth, my wrist sore where the mark had darkened slightly. I tried to focus on mundane things, classes, papers, meals, but the memory of the frost, the whispers, clung to me, an invisible weight pressing my chest flat. Thomas laughed when I told him of the dream, saying I was letting folklore get under your skin. But he didn't see the bruise, didn't hear the cold whispering in my ears that I could not shake. A fortnight later, I returned once more, braving a blizzard that had returned with relentless insistence. I carried my notebook and camera, planning to document everything systematically. The grave was there, untouched by human hands, frost glimmering unnaturally in the dim daylight. I knelt again, recording the intricate patterns, when I felt the crunch behind me. Slow, deliberate footsteps again. I dared not look, but my body knew someone, or something, was there. The whispers returned, clearer this time, threading through the wind, wrapping around my spine. I tried speaking, asking what it wanted, why it lingered, but no answer came beyond the murmured, unintelligible syllables. I snapped a photo, hoping to capture some proof, and when I looked at it, The figure appeared faintly behind the grave, shadowy and indistinct, its presence undeniable, and yet impossible to confront directly. I fled again, notebook and camera in hand, wind biting my cheeks, leaving trails of footprints in the snow that seemed to disappear behind me almost immediately. The bruising on my wrist had deepened, and when I examined it by the lamp in my cabin later, it seemed almost like a fingertip imprint pressed into my skin. My photographs were corrupted, frames flickering between normal and impossible, fingers of frost stretching and curling over graves in ways I could not have captured intentionally. I tried rational explanations: reflection, editing error, camera malfunction, but the whispers continued in my dreams. The metallic taste lingered, and the sense of being watched would not leave. Over the following winters, I avoided the cemetery when the snow fell, but each January I dreamt of it. The frost, the whispers, the footsteps crunching in tandem with my own. Sometimes in daylight, walking past it on a distant path, I swear I see patterns forming on that grave even without frost, shadows stretching like hands, beckoning. The weight of the unacknowledged, the unfinished, presses on me still, a constant reminder that some places, some presences, are not meant to be disturbed. If you ever find a grave in the snow that seems too new, and the wind carries a whisper you cannot place, leave immediately and do not look back. Which story setting scared you the most? Let me know in the comments. And that concludes our journey through Appalachia feral people horror stories. Which one made your blood run cold? If you made it all the way, type "The hills are watching" in the comments, so I know you're one of the brave ones. Until next time, stay cautious, stay alert, and remember, some people are better left unseen